Most acknowledge that UFO reports are not restricted to one particular country or continent of peoples. It is a global phenomenon, and those most closely affected by it, be they researchers or eyewitnesses, often come together at conferences staged throughout the world to share their views, information, and knowledge. In December 1999, we journeyed to Acapulco in Mexico, a popular holiday resort on the Pacific coast, to participate in the last major conference of the old millennium. Countless holidaymakers flock to Acapulco from countries far and wide throughout the year, drawn by sun-drenched beaches, magnificent bays, and nightly festivities which are a throwback to ancient Mexican culture. But the main attraction of that December week was undoubtedly the Congreso Mundial OVNI, an event which saw several sparkling presentations by some of the best-known figures in international UFO research. During our week-long visit, we caught up with several of the speakers during breaks in proceedings to seek their views on matters which are both topical and of particular relevance to their own field of study. Among them was Dr. Bob Wood and his son Ryan, who, over the past couple of years, have made several outstanding breakthroughs in analysing countless documents pertaining to an alleged covert UFO study group known as Majestic 12. Later, we hear from Dr. Richard Haynes, widely acknowledged to be the world's leading expert on UFO and pilot encounters. And we discover what persuaded best-selling author Whitley Strieber to turn his attention to a new book on the environment entitled The Coming Global Superstorm. But we begin with Bob and Ryan Wood, who later this year will be among the guest speakers at the 19th Leeds International UFO Conference.
The manual is an instruction manual for personnel to recover crash saucers and ship the parts to various places. It does include special procedures for shipping from overseas. And so in that sense, it embraces the overseas aspect.
Right. It's important to remember, it is a field manual for troops in the field. And I think that this was, it didn't give a very broad overview of the program or maybe the other foreign intelligence that may have been available, but it was sort of a how-to manual. And when you look at the mundaneness of crate packing, it is almost an identical copy of an existing field manual, Army field manual from Carlisle Barracks in Pennsylvania, where they have a reservoir of all these manuals. And you can find the references in the back of the manual perfectly line up for the era, and some of the documents changed shortly thereafter the manual was printed in April of *54. So it's interesting that it's such a tight fit to that time frame. And even you might say that the fact that it's just about recovering wreckage and so forth, and not about all the other aspects that you mentioned, lends towards its authenticity rather than detracts.
There are some other subtleties associated with the language too. For example, the use of the word screwdriver is two separate words, is the way it's shown in the manual, and that is consistent with what was in the dictionary like in 1949. And then over the next decade, it changed to one-word use as the application to a vodka drink got more prevalent.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned some of those things. I mean, the first thing I think of is the control page in the manual. At first, the control page was not distributed because Don Berliner didn't perceive it, and then later it was discovered, and the control page has specific changes in the manual, and then initials and authorizations. And some of the initials, the JRT and EWL, we've been doing research and trying to identify those specific soldiers that would have been responsible for that in the Kirkland Air Force Base phone book. Stamped inside the manual is Unit KB-88, Building 21, Kirtland Air Force Base. And we found there really is a Building 21. It's now called Building 750. And we can't determine whether or not there was a Unit 88, but we're in a correspondence with the historians of Kirtland Air Force Base, and we've been given verbal authorization to get the historic phone books to review and look for EWLs and JRTs, and then ultimately find those soldiers and ask them those questions.
Well, we certainly welcome criticisms or concerns about the authenticity of the manual. In fact, we keep a running list of the best way to deal with those concerns. And well, one of the concerns, for example, was a raised Z. And what happened was, when I first met with a specialist at the government printing office and asked him, I said, well, what do you think about this manual, this document? Does it look authentic to you or not? And he studied it and puzzled over it for a little bit, and he said, well, it looks to me like the type is right, monotype modern. And then he looked and he says, and it's interesting, he said that every so often the Z's are raised like we used to get in those days. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, because once in a while in letters that were not frequently used, they would only have a few master brass letters in the stack, and then every so often you get some sort of a piece of lead on the bottom, and you would find a repetition of the Z being raised in particular. So my partner's son went to the Stanford Library, and he found a document that was authentic, 1954, with just a few raised Z's.
And you actually see lots of variability in the E's, in the A's, not so much on their lining up, but the formation of each of those letters when studied under 400% magnification. You can see that it's a mechanical process.
And the answer is that as Stan Friedman and I followed the trail of the Special Operations Manual, he continued to receive correspondence from Timothy Cooper, including copies. And I didn't know that. And then, you know, as we were talking along, he said, well, you know, I'm getting stuff from a guy who lives in California. In fact, he says he lives a lot closer to you than I do, Big Bear Lake. Why don't you go up and visit him? So I called him and went to visit this guy, Tim Cooper. And he said that over all the years that he'd tried to get some interest from somebody in the UFO community, I was the first person to drive up the hill and say hello. So he was therefore motivated to exchange information, and after a couple of meetings with him myself, then Brian and I met with him together. We've probably had 6 visits, many dozens of hours.
Yeah, 20 or 25 hours time with him.
So Timothy Cooper's background is that he grew up in near Holloman Air Force Base in Alamogordo, and one of his close relatives was assigned there to work in the Army, and he had an unusual experience where he was asked apparently to run copies of a classified report which had to do with the crash recovery of a UFO. And he told this story to Timothy, and that caused Timothy to get some interest, so that as of 1988, Tim began to file Freedom of Information requests that ultimately transcended 12 different agencies. He has 5,000 pages of Freedom of Information request responses in his living room.
Well, he basically has six different source elements. The first element was the Legionnaire. He met at the local Big Bear Legionnaire, who gave him the air accident report, which he later forwarded to Leo Stringfield, who published it in his book Status Report number 4, I believe. And then he had another source, a CIA archivist, who apparently contacted him and met him in person in a parking lot and handed over the Marilyn Monroe document, which mentions MJ-12 and the 5412 committee in the lower left-hand corner and signed by James Jesus Angleton.
Now, was that an original document or was it a photocopy?
Both are photocopies at present. And then the next source or rival was Cantwheel, the alias Thomas Cy Cantwheel, as we've become, I think Cy is his middle name or first name, but Thomas Cy Cantwell. And you got mailbox drops first, and then there was an in-person meeting with Tim. And then Salina.
There were 3 mailbox drops and then a meeting.
Right. Then Salina, the daughter of Cantwell, a year later, sort of, I believe after Cantwell passed away, sort of wrote a note and attached more documents and said, my father's dying wish to the effect is that you have these. And so they were delivered.
And then finally, in 1999, on July 9th, he received a package from a source called S1 in the mail, and also a package from the source S2, which included a large manuscript that was originally unclassified, that was stamped Top Secret Magic. So those are the 6 sources that Tim Cooper winds up being the conduit for.
Now, it's important to emphasize that, you know, Tim tried to correspond with Dick Haynes and Tim Good and Stan Friedman and maybe a couple other serious researchers, and wrote them letters, gave them documents and so forth, tried to get them interested at all, and they weren't really responsive or interested. And from 1992, I believe, to 1996, until we got involved, he just kept them in his attic. He was kind of like, I'm not sure they're real at all.
He was quite skeptical.
He was very skeptical. And he wasn't out to make money or do this or the other thing. He just sort of sat on it. You know, he has a full-time job as a security guard.
What is it about these latest documents which have got you to, I think it would be fair to say, excited?
Yeah, it's the original paper and original ink and original typewriting. That's the #1 thing, because those are all forensically testable. And then the sheer volume of material, the sheer volume of original obscure material.
When you talk about obscure material, what do you mean obscure material?
Well, things that you couldn't even contemplate fabricating unless you had a degree in military history, had 10 or 20 years as an archivist in one of the many presidential libraries or national archives. I mean, you need those skills to try to create or fake something. They're just
the most
weird or difficult to find.
Yeah.
The most recent documents that have arrived really contain quite a range of material, in the sense that some of it is stamped in red Top Secret Magic or Top Secret MJ12, and others of it are merely newspaper clippings that were included in the original Blue Book files. So
now we're talking, forgive me, we're talking about Blue Book documents that are not contained in the National Archives.
Yes.
New Blue Book documents.
New Blue Book documents. Many of the documents are unequivocally Blue Book documents. One of the documents not only references Blue Book in sort of a notation on the upper right, but it also identifies MJ12 and paperclip files, all in the same document. But the document itself is a publicly available technical paper on nuclear propulsion.
Right. Yeah, that's actually one of the ones that are posted on the website on www.majesticdocuments.com. Is we posted the first 10 or 15 pages of a report on isotope thermal thrusters by John Martinez, who is alive and well today. And this report is stamped Top Secret Magic on it. It's a photocopy now, but the man's alive. He has the right expertise and background. Everything sort of checks. The only thing that hasn't been done is to go confront him or ask him, did you write this? And that's a tricky situation, because I believe for the first time we have somebody who's fingerable as a source for reverse engineering and reverse sciencing. Here's a technical paper with Top Secret Magic on it. It's talking about propulsion technologies in the 50s, or actually his papers are from the 50s in some cases, but this is actually a 1968 or 69 paper.
So it may sound an obvious question, but how can you approach this guy?
Well, the first thing he would do, suppose he's still cleared, he would call a security office and say, Bob and Ryan just came by to visit me and asked me about classified material. What should I say? How should I deal with that? I want to plan that and think that through a little bit.
But is this a name that's, you know, it's out in the open?
It is out in the open,
Yeah.
but nobody really understands
Well,
to go find him. Except until now, I just told
Yeah.
him.
We have a long list of actions that we should be taking. One of which is, for example, contacting Dr. Ray, REA.
There's a lot of names in these documents,
that's
isn't
right.
there?
Right, and then the 93rd Technical Services Unit, I have their complete roster. These are the people that recovered the wreckage from Roswell, according to the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. Detachment 3 ran around, picked up all the wreckage and so forth. There's 160 and some odd names of privates, sergeants, PFCs, so forth,
Yeah.
that were responsible. And I've found 30 of them on the internet, on Yahoo search, people search. And I've started to call some of them. And the question is finding the people that are in Detachment 3. Some of them have recalled, yeah, I was in New Mexico, I was there, but not talking about anything unusual. It's like, I picked up rocket debris all summer long. That's what happened to me. That was one case, and we have probably another 20 witnesses that can be researched that are easy before you start getting the names that are exceptionally difficult to find.
It clearly gave the coordinates of landing zone 2. And my first question is, I wonder where that is. I said, Ryan, do you have a topo map to go look? And so he did.
I got several copies and mailed them to all my friends. And sure enough, about 800 feet or so from the Trinity burst is this longitude-latitude coordinate. And then the challenge is, well, we need an aerial photograph of this particular site. And what we found was, I went to the Whittier Archives in Southern California and went and found aerial photography of the Trinity burst site. And this is the Trinity burst site in the center with a fence around it. This is dated September 23rd, 1948. You'll notice in the lower left there's also a small circle and a round zone around that.
Yes.
And that is the coordinates of LZ2. And I found this particular picture before the summer drops happened at all. I mean, like March or April of this year. And then later in the summer, we got a picture in a separate envelope that was this picture. And this picture is a leaked photograph from source S1 that shows a Trinity burst, a little 100-meter thing, and then a clear zone in that lower left-hand corner that has, more trampling and a bigger security circle around it.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting to note these two particular photographs, clearly showing that something happened. The next photograph we want to get is the one that's dated, June 30th, 1947, that there was nothing there.
If the Majestic 12 documents turn out to be the real thing, then clearly elements of the United States Air Force will have had a prominent role in any decision-making process. Over the past 50 years, many Air Force pilots have submitted their own official accounts of UFO encounters. But it's not just military pilots who have attracted the keen interest of American researcher Richard Haynes. His interviews with civilian pilots and flight attendants have helped Richard amass a personal data bank comprising of over 3,000 UFO pilot reports. It is, by far and away, the largest collection of its kind in the world.
And I began this level of work back in the 60s, 1960s. when I was doing research for NASA, and had an opportunity to meet a lot of pilots. And so it's an important area, and I continue to collect data. I have over 3,000 cases now, very good cases. But I'm trying to specialize in electromagnetic effects. Some transient change in flight director, altimeter, compass, VORs, onboard electronic systems that only change their behavior when there is the presence of some strange phenomenon near the airplane.
Is this something that has stemmed from a result of actually analyzing the data and looking for specific patterns?
Partly. As a psychologist, I'm very concerned with the entire testimony. And what that means is not just the words that are used, but the presentation of those words, nonverbal communications, the engineering aspects, what the pilots tell me. So I've had to study a lot about aeronautical systems, aeronautics in general, so that I can put it in context and try to draw conclusions, not just from the patterns, which are important, but from specific details.
Yeah. Your background as somebody who began this interest working with NASA, what were you actually doing with the space agency at that time, back in the early 60s?
I was directing a laboratory called the High Luminance Vision Laboratory, which was basically a space simulation. And I could simulate the way objects look to the astronauts in outer space. And this was done for rendezvous and docking purposes, for Gemini, Project Gemini. And during that research, I came to discover that I could set up an optical situation in my laboratory. It was a clean room, before there were clean rooms. And there was a solar simulator for realistic sunlight as it exists in space. And I could set up a target situation that could totally fool the observer. And I was surprised at that. I didn't expect that that could happen. But by controlling the optical variables, I discovered that I could fool you. I could make you see anything I wanted you to see practically. I could change shape, color, size, intensity, orientation, distance. And so I said to myself, I can explain UFOs. They're just misidentified natural phenomena. And I think as a skeptic, I set out to disprove the whole thing. Well, it wasn't very long before I found out that I was wrong. I couldn't explain everything that way.
Yeah.
And that came as a result of interviewing pilots, a lot of them.
Were these in the main military pilots, or was it just a general mix at that time?
General mix. I think there were more commercial pilots, actually, because we were testing volunteer commercial pilots in our flight research in simulators.
But was there one specific incident that you can recall that set you on this trail, if you like, of making damn sure that when the opportunity arises, you can have a quick word with those pilots, and then if necessary, if the pilot's conducive to your line of questioning, do a lengthier study on a particular incident and the like?
Well,
was there one thing that stuck out?
I wish I could say yes, but my conversion was slow and gradual, because I'm a skeptical, kind of a stubborn person.
Yeah.
And I had to let the data speak for itself, and the data came in bits and pieces. So it isn't any one case, although there are many spectacular single cases that I've looked at. It's the constellation. It's the message that is embedded in many, many high-quality cases from pilots. As I fly commercial around the world, I try to make it a point to talk with the flight crew, both the flight attendants in the back and the flight crew up front. And I must say that I'm getting about 15 to 20%.
Really?
Roughly 1 out of 5 people I talk with say yes, they've had a strange sighting. That doesn't mean that it's a, quote, traditional UFO, but it's something they couldn't identify.
Yeah.
And with their experience, that's significant, you see. I will share one that took place over Lake Michigan on an L-1011 filled with passengers on July 4th, 1979, I think it was. I don't remember the year, very frankly, because I have so many. It's hard to remember them. But they were on autopilot at cruise altitude, cruise speed. The sun is above them and slightly behind them. And the captain told me face to face, sitting in the cockpit of this airplane later on when we reconstructed the whole event, that he was sitting back in his seat with his hands behind his head, just, you know, nobody's flying the airplane, it's flying itself.
Sure.
His co-pilot is turned in his seat looking behind him to the flight engineer talking about something. And the sky is blue and no cloud up ahead. Well, Captain Schultz told me that suddenly something caught his attention out to the left about 30 degrees of straight ahead and 30 degrees above the horizon. And so he concentrated on it, and he said it appeared very quickly, full size. It did not appear as a point and enlarge. That's important. He said it was as if the object had broken through the atmosphere, because as it appeared full size, little radiating lines seemed to appear like stress cracks. He took a paper napkin that he had in the cockpit, and he had me hold two corners and he held two corners, and he pushed his thumb through the middle like he was demonstrating this effect. Well, he said, "What's that?" He thought he'd have a mid-air collision. He was quite concerned. His first officer turned in his seat and could see it. I talked to both of them and got the same story. The object was silvery, reflected sunlight the way polished metal would, came down in altitude to his altitude, did a high-speed turn, I calculated about 30 Gs, roughly, and about 1,000 miles an hour towards him, about 1,000 miles an hour going away in a climb, which is significant. And as it's leaving, it leaves a wispy, dark smoke trail behind it. He didn't see it coming. He said that he immediately radioed the Milwaukee center, flight traffic control, and said, "Do you have any other traffic up here with us?" And they checked their radar and said, "No, we have nobody up here." And he didn't report it, obviously. I met a Soviet fighter pilot who'd retired by the time I met him. This was approximately 1995, 94 that I met him. And he came to Novosibirsk, where I was lecturing at the university there, to meet me from Chelyabinsk. And because he had this story to tell, and he couldn't find anyone to tell it to. And so I'd been there from America, and so he came over. Well, he was in a Czechoslovak two-place trainer, but he was alone in the cockpit, doing acrobatic training. It was a clear, sunny day, very cold, as you might imagine, in the Ural region. Well, he was doing acrobatic loops, vertical loops. And as he would come over the top and start down the other side, he was generally in the northerly direction. And the city of Chelyabinsk, which is about 1.5 million people, was to the north of him. And he said on three of these loops, and as he got to the top of this loop and looked almost level now in the northerly direction, here was a very long, grayish cigar just hovering out there in front of him. Well, he was flabbergasted. I mean, he was shocked. He doesn't speak a word of English, and so it was all in Russian. And he said to me that it didn't move, as far as he could tell. There was no background to compare, actually. But he was surprised it was above the city, because there was a lot of air defense at that time. This was before Perestroika. And he did 3 of these loops, and each time it was in the same place, and he radioed the field where he had taken off from, which was to the south and east of the city quite a ways. "Do you have anything on radar?" And they checked, nothing on radar. So they said, "Come back and land. Don't stay up there." He had no weapons on board the plane. It was just a training flight. So he did. He immediately went back. As he's getting ready to land, which must have been 10 minutes later approximately, he happens to touch his face. He's wearing a leather flight helmet, no goggles, so it's unexposed around his eyes, and an oxygen mask. He gave me the oxygen mask as a souvenir. He said, "I happened to touch my eye region and my nose above where it was protected, and I couldn't feel anything. I was anesthetized." And he used the Russian word for cork. He said, "My skin felt hard and puffy, and I had no sensation there, like cork." So he landed. he's getting a little concerned, right? Went right, got out of the airplane, went right to the dispensary, to the doctor. The doctor examined him and said, you have some sort of burns, skin burns. Come back and see me in a day if they don't repair. Well, he said for about 2.5 to 3 weeks, his skin right in this open region here puffed out, he said, about 1/2 inch. Well, I talked to his wife when I was visiting years later in Chelyabinsk, and she backed up the story. She used her own words, but it backed up the story. She was scared. Some sort of radiation she was concerned about. And eventually, after 2-3 weeks, it goes back to normal, and there's nothing remaining, by the way, today. He was very concerned, as you might imagine. And I said, would you be willing to let me hypnotize you? And this is only the second time I've had a pilot agree. And so in Russian, would you believe, I hypnotized this Russian pilot, the Soviet pilot, and he comes out with more details under hypnosis, which tells me that it's a valid technique, and I can't bias him in any significant way because I don't know that cockpit that well. Later on, I studied the cockpit and the flight performance of the aircraft, and I can tell you the wavelength transmission of the windows, because I'm concerned of how many seconds he was exposed, assuming it was from that object. What is the radiation dose falling on the skin that would produce that level of effect? Even though we don't know what it is. It was edema. It was a water buildup, but we don't understand the hardness, the cork effect, let's call it. It was a very interesting case from the Soviet Union. One case comes to mind, a pilot and 3 passengers, 2 of whom were pilots themselves, were flying from southern Florida up to North Carolina at night in a twin-engine propeller plane. And Willie Smith did the analysis with Dr. Hynek years ago. The 2 of them interviewed the pilot. Well, they had electromagnetic problems with their VOR, which is part of the in-flight navigation system, such that it was drifting them farther and farther out to sea. They were over the Atlantic Ocean at the time. They were about 10 miles off the coast of Florida, and they could keep the land in sight, but there was not much traffic, and the air was as reasonable and so forth, smooth. Well, that's the first part of the story, that they're drifting more and more. So air traffic control, I think in Atlanta, calls them and says, where are you going? Correct your flight path 10 degrees left, you know, get back to land, so to speak, because you're drifting further and further. And they check their VOR and find that it's correct, that it's reading correctly, even though the radar from the ground tells them they're in the wrong place, more and more. Well, this happens twice. They have 2 corrections in flight over about a 40-minute period. Well, at one point, off to the east of them in the dark night sky, they see a light coming towards them, and it's fairly fast, it's fairly bright. They think it's an airplane. So he flashes his landing lights, which is standard operating procedure, right? Just to signal they see you, because you don't want to have any collision, of course. The object comes towards them on a bearing about 40 degrees, about the 2 o'clock position, roughly, relative to their heading. Comes down to their altitude, and the witnesses claim that this was a triangle, an equilateral triangle, whose sides were vertical. You can think of that. So it isn't a thin triangle, it's a thick triangle, about 6 stories high. What's that, 60 feet, 70 feet thick, and at least, I forget that the estimate was hundreds of feet side to side to side on the 3 sides, and a triangular opening in the middle. And the pilot said it was such a huge opening that he was contemplating flying through the middle of this thing to avoid it. The object comes to an instantaneous stop at some unknown distance, where they don't know how far away it was, and reverses 180 degrees and goes off as it has come at a high speed until it's out of sight. Well, as interesting as that case is, that's a non-aerodynamic vehicle as far as I'm concerned. It's not ball lightning. It's not birds. It's not a balloon for lots of reasons. It's not stealth technology, because you'd never build anything that's stealth that way. We don't know its propulsion. It did not produce a shock wave. In that case, there were no electromagnetic effects as it was near the airplane. Perhaps the earlier effects, we don't know. It had very bright round lights, like headlights, along this 60-foot high front facing it. It flew front forward, by the way, not point forward. Each of these round lights were estimated to be 6 feet in diameter and white. So you can calculate the megawatts that are required to light those searchlights up, whatever they are. And by the way, I don't think they're portholes and I don't think they're lights. I think they're a direct artifact of the propulsion system.
While putting pen to paper has never been a problem for Richard Haynes, the same can't be said of Whitley Strieber. Over the past decade, this most complex of characters has unleashed a mind-numbing series of books on UFOs ever since undergoing a traumatic abduction experience which deeply affected the man. But what, we wanted to know, had persuaded this gifted writer to set aside all talk of UFOs and abductions and instead produce an astonishing new book, warning of impending dangers to the global environment.
The subject matter of the new book, which is called The Coming Global Superstorm, is sudden climate change. In the New Scientist of November the 27th, 1999, there is a story about the North Atlantic Drift, which is a current that is vital to the weather of Europe. And it states that this current is changing its strength because of global warming, and that Europe is liable to get much colder very soon. A few days ago, there was a violent storm that swept across Europe because, apparently, of the declining power of the North Atlantic Drift. The coming global superstorm is about what happens as these currents that bring warm water up from the tropics fail. And the reason they will fail is that the water in the northern oceans is getting so warm that the heat pump effect between the tropics and the north is ending. And the ironic danger of global warming is not that things will get too hot, but that they're going to get very much colder very suddenly, and the first place at peril is Europe. That is essentially the thesis of this book.
What was it, what was the catalyst, if there was such a thing, that inspired you to research, if you like, the environment and produce this book?
Well, I was writing a book called The Edge with the radio show host Art Bell. We were working on it together when I had a meeting in Toronto with a gentleman who seemed to know a great deal about the way the planet works, including giving me a quick 2-paragraph explanation of ice ages, and the comment he also made was that this was about to happen again. And I took notes while he was talking, and it was complex, but I was able to sort them out well enough. And when I sorted them out, I began to realize that what he had described was at the absolute edge of scientific knowledge of how the process of ice ages has taken place. And it was very interesting, and I could also see that it was a very important warning because things were going to fall to pieces pretty soon, and we really weren't looking for this. We didn't realize it. So Art and I decided to change the subject of the book and write about this. This gentleman that I met came to my room in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he seemed as human as you and me. He just was terribly brilliant. And there were many, many other things that he spoke about as well that I thought were richly insightful. It was a marvelous meeting, and that was where it started.
Now, there's no mention whatsoever of UFOs or extraterrestrials or anything of that ilk in the book itself, but nonetheless, would it be fair to say that all of these so-called visitations, all of these global events that some label UFO phenomena, some label contact, some label all manner of things, would it be fair to say that all of this has now, if you like, you found a meaning for this, that the well-being, the safety, if you like, of our planet is uppermost in the importance, if you like, of the phenomena, or whoever is behind the phenomena?
The well-being of the planet and of us is uppermost in my mind. I have taken from my experiences whatever I could to serve that, including trying to understand whether or not there really are aliens here. I tried hard to find this man, to understand who he was and how he had gotten to where I was in the middle of the night, when there was no one except just 3 or 4 people even knew where I was. I was unable to do so. I consider him to be in some way connected with the phenomenon, but I don't know how. He seemed totally human.
Good evening, Acapulco.
Buenas noches, Acapulco.
The UFO Congress in Acapulco was a memorable event, made all the more so after the Pope gave his personal blessing to the organisers, through his close friend and Catholic Church theologian, Monsignor Corrado Balducci, the same Pope who only a year before had travelled to Mexico City and been greeted not just by millions on the ground below, but an extraordinary fleet of spheres which appeared directly overhead.
¿Todavía los tienes?
Sí.
No se vaya a acabar la pila.
No, son 20 minutos de pila.
Ah, bueno. ¿Por dónde van,
No los veo.
No, son tres esferas.
For years, skeptics and debunkers, and indeed some UFO researchers, have poured scorn on the so-called fleets. They insist that the sphere-like objects are nothing more than balloons. However, during our visit to Acapulco, Russell Callahan stumbled across a little-known but crucial fact that belies this argument.
Well, here we are putting the final touches to another edition of UFO's Hard Evidence. And just reflecting on what Graham had to say there, the trip to Acapulco was indeed fantastic. It was a privilege to be invited there to speak. We actually showed the Mexican people some of the NASA footage that has got people talking across the globe, really, by way of a thank you. Let's be honest now, Mexico has provided some of the best rational UFO footage and images and accounts for the last 10 years from anywhere else on the world, and it's Jaime Maussan who's been instrumental in making sure that this stuff goes out to people. We've done our bit, we've made sure that people see what Jaime's been presenting. Now, some people will have different feelings on some of the Mexican footage. For instance, we saw there Roman Catholic city, or a Roman Catholic country. Mexico City alone has 22 million people. 98% of those are Roman Catholics. The Pope's visit was important and it meant a lot to those people. Shall we say that the fact that footage was recorded on the day of the Pope's visit isn't surprising. The Catholic Church, as we've seen in earlier editions of UFO's Hard Evidence and of course in the magazine, are embracing the subject in Mexico City. The word UFO is in the Vatican's own directory, and Monsignor Corrado Balducci seems to be at ease with the subject with the Mexican people. So much so that when we stood there on the Wednesday night and heard Corrado Balducci deliver the Pope's personal blessing on the Congress and wishing it success and happiness to the people who were there, It's a milestone that wasn't talked about anywhere other than in Mexico. Surely that should make the news, you know, but that's another story. What we're talking about is, are these fleets the real McCoy? Are they balloons? Are they hoaxes? Are they stars? Well, the stars for me, no. The skeptics seem to hang on to anything and everything that's feasible. Stars can't be stars in the daylight. These things are moving about, for goodness sake. Look closely at the footage. They don't move in the same direction. These things wander around each other. The formations change, especially this one on the day of the Pope's arrival. The formations are constantly changing. Birds don't fly like that. Birds tend to stay together and move together. And if we watch carefully, we can see that there's different motion, different speeds within the actual fleet or flotilla or whatever you'd like to refer to it as. We don't know what they are. One thing that I'm fast becoming to accept that they aren't are balloons. Now, we've heard over the years, and last year there was some remarkable footage shot in the south of England that the people at the television company who recorded this footage didn't want to share it with anyone, so the only people who saw it were those fortunate to be in the south of England on the night of the newscast, or if someone's been fortunate to see a recording of this thing. Leading researchers in this country turn around and say, oh, these are just balloons. Well, Mexico City is a little bit different. This country, 600-700 feet above sea level is the norm. The high peaks up on the moors of Yorkshire and up in the Cumbrian mountains, 1,100 feet above sea level. That's nothing. You know, Mexico City is thousands and thousands of meters above sea. Staying with Jaime, who lives in Mexico City itself, I can tell you climbing the stairs to bed on a night was something of a task. You know, the breath is drawn away from you. It took me 5 or 7 days just to be able to feel comfortable with the high altitude and the low air content, or the low oxygen content within the air. This poses a problem for things like this. During the Congress, a young man was there every day with this Corona advertising blimp, advertising the Congress, but he was tethered. And I thought, well, surely they're going to fly this darn thing. It was beautiful weather, you know, it was 90 degrees in the shade, there wasn't a breath of wind, there shouldn't have been problems. I spoke to him, and in broken English he explained quite simply that the problem is the altitude in Mexico, more so Mexico City than Acapulco, because Acapulco is only a few hundred feet above the sea, but the quality of helium gas that's to go into these things to fill them makes the expense enormous to fill one of these blimps with high quality helium to get lift. Because of the altitude of Mexico City, even when we get these things buoyant, he described them as being lazy. They fly very lazily in the sky. Yes, children's balloons are available. We've seen the cartoon characters, the little silver balloons, and I've seen them where people have let go of them, and they don't achieve a great height. These things seem to saunter about at 10-15 feet above the ground and end up getting caught in the electricity cables that are only maybe 20 feet above the road. Now that's due quite simply to the atmosphere, the air conditions in Mexico City. Again, very high altitude, very thin air, the helium just can't lift the balloons, and to say that a fleet of balloons could be released, hundreds of balloons, in the Pope's image we've counted 50 different things there, 50 different images. If this was the case, and these things are flying at several thousand feet, the volume of helium gas and the expense of helium gas to fill these balloons to achieve this sort of lift would put you in the category of paying somewhere around about 15 or 20 pounds a balloon. Mexican people don't earn that in a week. Ask yourself the question, are they going to pay that for a balloon? No. I do not think these are balloons.
As we approach the dawn of a new millennium, something else of potentially huge importance was taking place on the other side of the world. On the 26th of December, the Phenomena exhibition opened its doors at the Fremantle passenger terminal near Perth, Western Australia. Some 2 years in the planning and a solid year in the making, the organisers of Phenomena intend to clone the exhibition and, through a worldwide franchising operation, help further educate tens of millions as to the reality of this subject. Occupying some 12,000 square feet of space and employing some of the very latest visual and display technology, the exhibition is composed of several pods, each comprising of a particular theme. UFO magazine has worked closely with the exhibition organisers during the past 2 years and made a sizable contribution in terms of literature, fact-finding, images and videotape material. Elsewhere, Dr. Roger Lear has supported the venture by kindly donating some of his prized surgically removed implants, while a mysterious sphere that fell to Earth in Mexico several years ago was loaned by Jaime Maussan and housed in an impressive glass casing. So join with us now as we wander through this truly unique exhibition, one that will reopen its doors in Sydney later in the year and later appear in towns and cities across the globe. Back in March this year, our travels took us to Laughlin, Nevada, home to the International UFO Congress and Film Convention, the largest UFO conference of its type staged anywhere in the world. Once more, our cameras were present to record several on-the-spot interviews with some of the key speakers. Larry Warren is no stranger to UK shores, but did he have anything new to add to those events he first described in his book Left at East Gate, which claimed among other things that a UFO appeared over Rendlesham Forest in December 1980.
Cameras and such like were taken into the woods over this period of time, but nobody until now has ever seen any images. Right. You produced images. Tell us about that.
The images that I showed one picture which didn't reproduce very well. We'll work on that glitch for leads. And sorted out by then, but what happened to me since our book came out, and of course we really did have a great deal of success as far as reaching people in England, them feeling empowered that this event is your Roswell, and it is something not to be ashamed of or not look at. It's something to really sink your teeth into and get involved. Well, having a book come out, and with the advent of the internet, and which I'm not up on unfortunately yet, a lot of witnesses that went through these events had no idea that word one had been mentioned about it. They went on with their careers, they retired, and in the last few years, 5 years or so, we've seen most of the people I was with either long out of the military, starting to see this stuff come up on their computers, or seeing the book on television, Bent Waters, my God, it's out. Or on the internet, easily accessing it, because there's the Bent Waters alumni site, people that were stationed there over a 40-year period. And they're starting to see, well, this is the UFO thing, it's out, and then they found it. What happened to Peter and I is that through our publisher, back when they did cooperate with us, and before they decided to keep the book sales, is that we would get letters forwarded to us. And many times they're from regular folks that come to these conferences. And more often than not, I started to find they were from very key players in this event that were higher ranked than I or equivalent rank. Some were friends, some I knew peripherally, saying, good for you, glad you did it. A few were, I have to be honest, saying, well, I don't remember any of this. A number of them were, my God, it filled in the gap because I couldn't get off my post that night. But it also countered, and will counter over this next year, is that I've been accused of it all, we all know this, but over the years, people have said that there was a rumor mill, and so anyone could have picked up on this information. It will be very apparent to people over the next year that there was no rumor mill when people that worked on our flight that didn't get out there had no idea what had happened at all. It was that clamped down, like some senior people said. I got a letter, first of all, that said, I want to thank you for what you did. This is leading to the pictures. They came out, and this gentleman said to me, and I'm holding his name right now because he's not sure what he would like to actually be dealing with this. I said, I don't know if I'm too controversial. I shouldn't be the guy. His view, counter view on that is that I've done this from the beginning. He's watched it develop. He said, no matter what they do to you, you keep coming back. He has children. He has a lot to lose. He's an executive now. He took these pictures, as he told me. I have all of it in his own handwriting. I even have the negatives, the original negatives, that can be analyzed and will. I've sat on these for 2 years. Even my dear co-author, Pete, has been very nervous about these, has been, I think, frightened of them. I have shown a few people, and over the years, I think it's one more nail in the coffin. Like, oh, Jesus, this guy might be right, for God's sake, and a lot of people don't want that to be. I don't want to be right. I want to know what happened to me. He told me I have these pictures, and I'm like, look, I'm not even an expert on this. I have enough to deal with on my plate. And basically, this guy was involved on the first night, snapped pictures with a Canon camera that was in the back of a law enforcement car for accident investigation. And he took the film. They encountered, this is literally when they were thinking they were encountering a crashed plane, started taking pictures of this triangular object as described, as seen in some of the reports that are coming out from the next day now. Same lighting configuration. It has density to the triangle, a black triangle. Doesn't look like what I saw on the 2 nights later at all. It really doesn't. But it does match exactly the verbal descriptions and written descriptions of the gentleman on the first night.
And he did something quite unique with the film.
Amazing. What he did, knowing he was higher ranked and had been in the game, knew this was extreme significance. These gentlemen did experience missing time, which they're having a great deal of problems with. These people are now seeking out UFO or experiencer-friendly therapists to heal some things that are in their lives, that memories. He took the film. What he did is that with his knowledge of this, he said, this film, it will never be seen again. To another person that was with him, he took the camera, he fired off pictures. The first picture I showed today was taken at a distance of 150 feet approximately in a clearing. I know exactly where this clearing is and have been bringing people there for years. It's not the site on the third night on Cable Green, it's before that. He took fired that first shot. His sense in his heart is that this phenomena knew they were there. The clicking of the camera told, it's just he sensed because it started moving toward him. He took that picture, he got pictures within 5 feet of it. He is not the Jim Peniston who touched the object and had the telepathy. I believe what Peniston says about that. I believe that was said to him by whatever was in. This gentleman continued to fire pictures off him, but because of he thought he had taken at least 15 to 20. I have 7. And I have the actual film. They just go blank. But there's a moment where radio contact was cut off in that forest. CSC couldn't reach these guys for 4 hours, and this is where I believe and other things happen.
Rod Regier has worked on several classified projects involving satellite surveillance technology. In his lecture, Regier demonstrated how some UFO activity had unquestionably been recorded from space. But how important are satellites to this subject, and what of the future?
I started working in the aerospace industry as an astronautical engineer in 1964. And I worked on the Saturn Apollo moon rocket, and my job was to design the interface wiring between the various elements of the rocketry, the different stages. Then I worked on the first space station, the Skylab, which, as your readers and viewers will know, impacted Australia several years ago. I don't know the specifications for that. And then moved on to a small company in California that's primarily designing remote sensors, but has nothing to do with the psychological remote sensors. These are items designed to detect events at a far distance. I always like to indicate, and I didn't in this presentation, but that there's a paranoia that starts to develop amongst people when they're around spy satellites and other things. They see maybe too many movies or something, but I guarantee you that these satellites cost millions and billions of dollars, and their operation runs into the millions of dollars per day. Our 15 minutes of satellite data is a computer printout a little over 6 inches thick, of which we have technicians wade through it to get some of the items that don't pass muster, so to speak, in the first breath. And so what we have is a tremendous amount of data, and for the resources to be spent on determining who's visiting whom at what meeting, it would be in the intelligence agency's best interest to pick up the telephone and have the local sheriff or police drop by and pay them a visit, rather than devote a very expensive reconnaissance satellite to take pictures of the license plates of the automobiles in the front yard. So when viewing conditions are right, we can read the newspaper that's on the front yard of somebody's house from deep space. We can do that, and we've been able to do that for years. More important, though, is we can also use these for beneficial measures that beyond the surreptitious observation of our neighbors, and that is to look out to exploit mineral deposits, find oil fields, look at pollution tracking. For law enforcement, we can track vehicles that may present a problem to us. We can watch troop movements. We can see refugees and maybe allocate resources. We can look for crop failures.
You liken this to possibly the major event in terms of credibility of eyewitness reports, in terms of the data and the like. How significant do you think it is, therefore, that we have corroboration, if you like, from an American reconnaissance satellite that something was over Tehran at that time?
I think the primary importance was that it demonstrated graphically, I believe, for the first time, both the capability and the limitations. We spotted this thing, we had it, and yet we were defenseless against it. Fortunately, I think we were able to sort of sit back and say, it's happening to a neighbor, and therefore we can coolly observe it, as opposed to it's happening in my front yard and I must worry to defend my family against it. And I think that allowed us to put in some measures. I know one of them was to improve communication systems that enable us to get the information back sooner. And I think that the lessons learned from the Tehran were instrumental in helping us in the Gulf War, because we've greatly increased our capability between those two events in a short period of time, when you're talking about the time lag in military procurement and activities to go along there.
Yeah. Intrigued to learn of the post-Tehran reports as this thing sped through the Mediterranean and out towards the Atlantic. Presumably then, was there no means for the satellite technology? It might have obviously been passed on to another satellite, I don't know. No data to suggest that this thing was tracked by satellite at that time.
Our satellite did not track it. What I believe happened is, as they change energy states, they become, the spectrum of observation shifts. And when they change energy states, we get to the point where we can't really detract. That's where I said the ultraviolet would be good for that. Visible light, when they reach a high energy state, they disappear.
Yeah. Where do you think satellite technology is going to be, say, 10, 20 years hence from now? And what impact do you think, generally speaking, that's going to have here for people on Earth?
I believe the big push, and we've already seen it start, will be on Earth resources management. And I mean that as the population continues to grow, we need to find new oil deposits to exploit, we need new mineral deposits, We need to really vigorously pursue monitoring the cleanliness of our water and our atmosphere. Where are the sources of pollution? And we can do that readily from space. So that the person who's doing the pollution can be tracked down and not his innocent neighbor who happens to have a smaller checkbook. So the biggest growth area I see is in enabling you and me to have a much better life as a result of applying this technology to our day-to-day living experiences, traffic patterns, cattle and animal migrations, and there's all manner of, we're only limited by our imagination, by what we can see looking down at this beautiful planet of ours, and wisely trying to monitor and care for it and nurture it. And I think we've got an opportunity to do that now that we've never had before.
At the beginning of the year, Peter Gersten, head of Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, challenged the US government in court to come clean about its knowledge of flying triangles. After winning a preliminary judgment in his favour, he later lost the argument when the judge ruled in favour of the government. Although this interview was conducted before the appeal, it nonetheless affords a fascinating insight into the mindset and thinking behind one of ufology's most influential characters.
Peter, fantastic interest throughout the UK in the recent trials and tribulations, shall we say, regarding your efforts to challenge various government departments as to the dissemination, if you will, of documented information relating to triangular craft. You're the man on the spot, shall we say. How would you appraise the current situation? I mean, this is quite a unique thing, isn't it, to get the judge to actually side with you?
Oh yes, this is the first time CAUSE has brought Citizens Against UFO Secrecy. In the last 20 years has brought maybe 6 lawsuits. This is the first time the judge has been receptive to my arguments. Receptive to the point of directing a governmental agency to provide a UFO group with additional information.
Now, what is it about the triangles that you feel is so significant, or is this just a part of the whole big picture here?
Well, you're right on both accounts. Number one, it's part of the big picture, but it also involves an object the size of a football field that can hover, or what's described as, from witnesses, as floating, which is unusual to describe a mechanical craft, that can accelerate rapidly, attain high speeds, that's virtually noiseless, that has orbs around the sides that detach and attach. I think that since this object is being seen in populated areas over the last 20 years, not only in this country, but in England and in Belgium and other countries, I think it's time we found out about it. And what's more significant is that when we inquired of this object from the Department of Defense, they told us they conducted a reasonable search and can find no information on this object. As far as I'm concerned, they're lying to us. It can't be possible because they searched the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency and they had no information. They searched the Joint Chiefs of Staff and they had no information. And the Department of Defense is charged with gathering intelligence and providing security for the citizens of this country. So how can they not know about an object that's seen at treetop level in populated areas over major cities in this age of terrorism? Well, the Department of Defense, for whatever reason, has not come to the courtroom, has not sent any attorneys. They are represented by the U.S. Attorney's Office. And they just toe the party line. They treat this as any other Freedom of Information request. The agency does the search. If they don't find documents, they move to dismiss it on the grounds a reasonable search was done. If they find documents, they either release them or withhold them on national security grounds. And that's what I thought this case would be about. The Department of Defense would find documents and say national security, as they did in the other cases CAUSE brought, and that would be the end of it. No judge has gone against that ruling. But they didn't. They stated they found no documents. They did a reasonable search. So the U.S. Attorney is just putting forward that position that they didn't have to do an exhaustive search. All they had to do is a reasonable search. They did a reasonable search. There are no documents. What we submitted, what Citizens Against UFO Secrecy submitted, were 33 affidavits from people that actually saw the object, were willing to come forward, put it down on paper, and then swear to the contents. So we submitted this to the judge, said, Judge, look, this object exists, Judge. It exists not only over the last 20 years, but it was seen last month. You know, so how could they not have information? How could they have done a reasonable search and not found anything? And the judge was convinced that at least at this level they have to provide us with more information telling us about their search.
The obvious question then arises, where are we going with this now? Where does Peter Gersten and Citizens Against UFO Secrecy hope to take this now? What's the next step?
We hope to go where no group has gone before. We hope to go into the darkest recesses of these governmental agencies to search for the truth and to end the secrecy.
Although Bob and Ryan Wood kindly spoke of their majestic 12 research in Acapulco, here at Laughlin, Ryan took the opportunity to share with us just a part of his massive image portfolio.
Example, this happens to be on phone records for 30 June 47, back to Roswell. There's other documents. Here's one on 14 July 47, all talking about phone records. Basically, there's a big complaint that people are using the phone too much and that only certain top-level brass can use the phone back to Washington because the lines are always jammed. You know, talk about good circumstantial evidence. And it's right here in historical typewriter, on negative, off microfilm. For somebody to fake this is an incredible amount of work for an unclear, nebulous purpose. This is the envelope where the other 77 pictures came, addressed to Tim Cooper and postmarked McLean, Virginia. And what was in this envelope was a series of color pictures, which I've broken into several different categories: craft, back channels, group photos, documents, MJ-12 portraits, and then autopsy. One of the craft pictures was a picture of the X-plane. And the X-plane is noteworthy in our documents because it's an experimental aircraft that crashed in New Mexico along the same time as one of the UFOs. And it's the earliest experimental aircraft which the U-2 spy plane was based upon. It was made by Convair. I'll mention this one for a second. This is a unusual looking craft that says DOD video. And what I just realized, really, after watching Wendell Stevens give his talk, is that this looks very similar to the egg beater type craft that was near Area 51, or was alleged to come from Area 51, with these funny looking protrusions. So I think that this is actually a U.S. built craft of some sort and not extraterrestrial. And that brings up a whole new thought in my mind of, am I getting junk along with... this is a picture of sort of an unknown object. It's unclear, and it's not sure that we don't have it right side up or upside down, but it looks like a spacecraft of some sort, although there seems to be like rivets or spark plug-like edges, which are consistent with some other witness testimony for craft. A couple of Russian or KGB officers, an MJ-12 back channel. We don't know his name. This one is a KGB intelligence chief. I can't remember his name right off the bat, but
you have identified him.
Yeah, one of our friends has got a name. And then here's a group picture of a variety of the MJ-12 players, Forrestal being front and center with Vandenberg and Bradley over here. And this is an admiral of some sort. He has a naval uniform on, but I don't know his name.
And this one around the table.
Okay. Which is, this is a picture of the Scientific Advisory Board in 1947 with Theodor von Karman at the head of the table. and the label of MJ12. It's not clear if everyone was cleared or briefed for MJ12, but I think that many people were involved in the reverse engineering. It may have been parceled out and they've only given one aspect of the problem to work on, but these people were most likely involved in a serious way.
Earlier we mentioned how Dr. Roger Lear had kindly donated some of his surgically removed implants to the Phenomena exhibition. But what is it about these implants, but that the makeup of the implants themselves points to an extraterrestrial presence?
Well, I was the one performing the first surgery because it was a foot case, and the general surgeon then acted as my assistant. In doing so, I was the one that did the active probing through the tissues to look for the object, and he, for example, as an assistant does, uses the retractors to hold the wound open and assist me with light and advice. One surprise came during this portion of the surgery when I touched something hard and the patient jerked her foot off the table, came out of the hypnoanesthesia, and just cried out in excruciating pain. This was a very big surprise because just for the anesthesia that I had in the toe alone, she should have felt absolutely nothing. Now, I always look for rational, normal answers to these things, and I felt that one of the things that could have possibly happened was that in touching something, I might have, let's say, pulled on some major nerve trunk that was outside the field of anesthesia. And sometimes that happens, and so although it was a big surprise, it wasn't thoroughly in the realm of impossibility. So though Daryl had reintroduced the hypnoanesthesia, I called for more local, we put in more anesthesia. I was the one with the forceps, as you say, to initially grab the object in its jaws and to get it loosened from the surrounding tissue and removed it. And at that point, the patient also had a rather violent objection and felt discomfort. When I took it out and I put it on a white 4x4 gauze sponge and I looked at it, I was absolutely amazed because I had never seen anything like this in 30-some odd years of surgery. And when you look at the general surgeon's clinical history too, he was just as amazed because he'd never seen anything that looked like that either. The next step was to ascertain as much information that we could from the material at hand. And the material at hand consisted of two types of material. One was the metallic portion of the implant, and one was the biological portion. Then we could say that the biological portion also was subdivided into two portions. The tissue that I had removed that surrounded the area where the implant was in, and the tissue that composed the membrane itself. So our first concern was the tissue that surrounded the implant. That's the first thing that went out for analysis. That's the first thing that I got reports on. That is the first thing that probably pushed me over the edge from a consummate skeptic to a maybe strange.
How so?
Because we found two things in the surgical pathology, came back separately. They were only told, laboratories were only told, that this was soft tissue surrounding a foreign body and the place that it was taken from. The primary concern of a laboratory when receiving a soft tissue specimen today is whether it's malignant or benign. That's their primary interest. And so, first of all, they came back, the tissue was benign. There was nothing there to indicate any kind of malignancy, no tumor-type tissue. Next thing what we found was that the tissue contained no evidence of an inflammatory response. And when I saw this, I read the first report, I said, gee, this is weird, what kind of a fluke is this? And thinking to myself, this lady must be a very strange lady because she doesn't react to inflammation when she gets something in her body. Individual thing, individual anomaly. Strange, but could happen. Then I read the second pathology report, which came back on the gentleman with the object in the hand, and again, in different language, different words, but saying the same thing, no inflammatory response. And I said, wait a minute. 2 individuals? Oh, there's something very strange here. Then the second strange thing we found, that in both individuals, these areas were loaded with what are called nerve proprioceptors, little special sensor organs of nerves in tissue where it is not anatomically correct to be. Anatomically, if we look at the body, or we look at the chart, or we look at a copy of Gray's Anatomy, or if you do surgery for 30 years, there's areas in the body where structures are constant. In other words, if you opened up a toe, you would expect to find bone. You would expect to find muscle. You would expect to find some blood supply. You would expect to find some nerve supply. Nerves and specialized nerve tissue run in the areas where they're supposed to be anatomically correct. If you look in a book, this is the training. Most human beings, if we open them up, certain areas of the body, all the anatomical structures will be the same. So that's actually what allows surgery to take place. We don't expect to open a chest and in one individual find the heart 2/3 on the right, 1/3 on the left. It's always 2/3 on the left, 1/3 on the right. The tissues where these objects came out of were sort of a fatty, fibrous, cushioning type of tissue, deep down next to a bone. These are not places where you find specialized end organs for nerves. It was found that if the objects were taken out of the blood serum solution and dried, the membrane became brittle and lost its tensile strength. And then you could take any sharp instrument and cut through it, scrape it off the metal that was within. And when we first did that, we found out that there was 2 pieces of metal that composed the T-shaped object, not one. But it would be impossible to know that as it came out of the body, because you could not move one little metal member on the other. It would not move. It was wrapped so tightly with this membrane structure, one piece of metal would not move upon the other. So that's how we got it off, and that's the next step, was that we took pieces of the membrane and we sent that for analysis. The results of the membrane analysis, again, was one of the many surprises now, one piled upon another, which propelled me into an area that I wound up in today. The membrane was composed of only 3 simple human biological substances. One is called a protein coagulum, which just means that it's protein derived from clotted blood. That's the bulk. And in this bulk, if you look at it under the microscope, you see some brown granules that look like raisins. And these brown granules were subjected to an iron stain, and it came back positive, and it was determined then that these brown granules was a substance called hemosiderin. And hemosiderin is an iron pigment, and it's oxygen-binding pigment, the cousin of which is hemoglobin, which is in the red cells. It's the carrier transport mechanism for oxygen about the body. Then the third and the last thing that we found were strands of keratin. And keratin makes up the outer layer of your skin, makes up your fingernails, toenails, your hair, and the first few layers of the cornea of the eye. And those are the only places you find keratin on the body. Now, there is a pathological situation. In other words, abnormal physiology is pathology. There are abnormal situations where you can find a process occurring in deep tissues of the body called keratinization. In other words, things can be coated with keratin. And we don't know why that occurs, but it's some sort of a genetic anomaly. But this was not keratinization. This was actually keratin strands that were in this membrane. And after learning that, I went into the medical school textbooks at Stanford, Harvard University, George Washington School of Medicine. on the computer and tried to see if there was something listed in the pathology books that I was not aware of, or something that may have been discovered for my 30 years of practice that I did not know. And I was unable to find anything that had ever been removed from the human body that was composed of these three substances. And this is a challenge that I put out today, that I make, of course, to anyone in the scientific field, is if they think these are mundane objects, then please, please direct me to where I might look into a textbook and see this material somewhere else. I think we might say that the total sum of what I've done so far is do 8 surgeries to date, and that the 8 surgeries have netted us 9 objects. And of the 9 objects, 1 turned out to be an ordinary piece of strange glass that contained sulfur. So that leaves us with 8 objects from 8 surgeries, all which turn out to be very strange. 3 of these 8 objects are little grayish-white balls that are attached to an abnormality of the skin. And these were mistaken by a dermatologist in one case to be a lesion called a calcifying epithelioma, saying that the little grayish-white ball was a ball of calcium. This was one of the first specimens that went into the National Institute for Discovery Science, and it turned out to have 21 different elements, and none was calcium. The information on the other balls, we are just starting now to get that information in because of the lack of funding and the cost of these tests. Now the other 5 objects are all metal objects and all covered with this very strange membrane. 3 of the 5 objects are little cantaloupe seed shaped affairs, and once the membrane is removed, there's a little metallic rod inside. The other one that was removed from the toe of the lady was a T-shaped object which contained 2 little metallic rods, one butted against the other. And the last one was a metallic triangle that was removed from a gentleman's jaw, also covered with this very strange membrane. Now, the first set of results came because the National Institute for Discovery Science had sent some of these metallic objects to Los Alamos National Labs. Los Alamos did a comprehensive examination with an electron microscope and told us what elements were in the metal rods. And at the end of their report, they merely suggested more research, more tests should be done. At that point, we knew we didn't have an ordinary piece of wood or a twig. We knew that a prestigious laboratory such as Los Alamos would not say go do further testing if they had an ordinary mundane object. So the objects then went back to NIDS, and from NIDS they went out to New Mexico Tech, which is another world-class laboratory, and an entire battery of metallurgical examinations were performed. The results, their conclusion was that these were objects that were most likely samples of meteorites. And they were not told the origin. The laboratories were never told whether these fell off an ostrich's feather or whether it was found on the bottom of the ocean. So we know, without a doubt, since there is no skin abnormalities with metallic objects, no scar, no visible port of entry, we certainly know that the lady did not step on a meteorite and the gentleman didn't whack one with the back of his hand. Finally, to top off the metallurgical testing, tests were run at the University of California, and the researcher there determined that some of the metals, some of the elements in these objects contain non-terrestrial isotopic ratios, which means they don't come from this Earth. By this time, I don't think that I could have had any further surprises that would push me farther over the edge than I already was. This was the icing on the cake. This then meant that we were proposing the most profound question that could absolutely be proposed to mankind. And that is, people who allege alien abduction wind up with objects in their body that contain extraterrestrial isotopic ratios. And therefore, the only conclusion that I could draw was that these people are telling the truth. And this is proof that mankind has been manipulated by extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, some other being other than human beings.
To end this edition of UFO's Hard Evidence, here's a look at some recent and not so recent video footage gleaned from UFO enthusiasts around the world. Until the next time, thanks for watching, and we look forward to the pleasure of your company again in the not too distant future.
Occurred on Saturday the 29th of April. What was unusual about this sighting was there were actually 4 separate sightings of craft within the space of roughly an hour and a half. This first piece of video you can see here shows a UFO with an aircraft in its very immediate vicinity. The aircraft seems to be above the cloud because it gets obscured behind the cloud. The UFO is actually, I believe, beneath it because it hovers underneath. So there could be some distance between the two craft, but still in aviation terms it's quite a near-miss event. So I think it's quite significant for those reasons. You can also see that there's quite a bit of aircraft traffic in the vicinity. It's a very busy part of London. You've got City Airport to the east and you've got traffic coming into Heathrow in the west. It's very busy. This second sighting occurred approximately 30 minutes after the first at around 3:22 p.m. Again, this object was quite indeterminate in shape, possibly spherical, very reflective, and was visible for approximately about a minute. Again, it appeared beside a cloud, hovered, and disappeared. Okay, we've seen 2 objects this afternoon. One was just a couple of minutes ago, very high altitude, that direction. It wasn't very near, but definitely a solid structured craft. That's 2 sightings in about 35 minutes, so it's very, very exciting. I'm hoping that one of these craft... This third object was probably the most unusual out of the 4. It consisted of a dumbbell type of craft, 2 spheres very closely linked together. As you'll be able to see from the video, seems to be a kind of rotation going on with these 2 objects, and you'll also notice the top of the spheres seems to blink in and out of visibility, very unusual. Again, suggests that this isn't a balloon or 2 balloons strung together, because again, it's swaying on a particular axis, and if these were balloons being buffeted around by the wind, you wouldn't really expect this kind of uniform rotation going on. I believe that personally this is some kind of dumbbell craft that is actually coming in and out of our dimensional plane, if you like. God knows what the physics involved is, but you know, one minute you can see this object and the next minute it's kind of hazy. This final object appeared at approximately 4:20, roughly 35 minutes after the dumbbell craft. Again, it just appeared from out of the blue. What's interesting about this object that it seems to hug the contour of the clouds. Now, it seems to me that it's definitely under intelligent control. If it were a balloon, you'd expect it to just be blown around randomly in the sky, but it's actually following the contour of this cloud as if to keep itself concealed from inquisitive eyes. This whole event drew to a close roughly about 4:25. So we're talking about an hour and a half in which 4 craft appeared at separate times. Again, this is sets a precedent for me. I think it's very significant that these craft are appearing in greater numbers and more often. I think there's definite hint that this is an attempt at communication by the occupants or the pilots of these objects.